So we'll move on to our next presentation, which is from Ryan Dempsey, who's the CEO at the Compliance Workbook. Over to you, Ryan.
I just want to kind of tickle your kind of imagination around data, insights, and knowledge and information, and just see what we can find. So, and obviously share my new logo for TCW. What's really interesting is we still are called the Compliance Workbook, but the reason why it used to state the Compliance Workbook, and a lot of people are asking me why I've removed the actual words and created the logo to look like this. And one of the key reasons is because compliance as a word has become a bit of a buzzword. Nobody really understands what it means. It's like artificial intelligence, it's like machine learning, it's like big data. These words are used to try and sell things into housing these days. And I thought it was unethical for me to be one of those brands that tells you and uses a word that very few people kind of really understand. So we dropped compliance from the logo, which is why you see it as it is today. In terms of just talking about that process of the work that's carried out, we'll focus on the analysis side, but for everybody who works in housing, there's a full circle in it, and it's constant in terms of your obligation from statutory legal, or if a tenant calls up and says, I need something, or like what was just discussed there, an adaptation. And these are things that you are obliged to do regulatory and legislatively. The work's carried out, you then receive a document, you carry out all that analysis, which is what I'll drill into. You then act on that analysis, and then fundamentally it goes back to your obligation again. And you're constantly doing that, or you should be constantly doing that full suite of things across all departments as well. So your repairs, your investment, your voids, your adaptations, your stock conditions, your asset management, everybody should be following that same process of going round and round. So just to give you an idea of sort of TCW's perspective, this is just a property with all of our different compliance areas. You've got gas, asbestos, you've got FRAs, you've got LOLA, Joe's in the way there because the things on the side, but you'll have on the right hand side, you'll have water, Legionella, you'll have electric, and then you'll have your smoke alarm commissioning. Yesterday, TCW ingested 15,128 documents. And when I say ingested 15,128 documents, that was between asbestos, gas, electric, Legionella, and FRAs. And that was across 300 different PDF types. So whereas a lot of people will see we can perform this analytics and data insight from a certificate and software tool, one of the really cool benefits of TCW is we're able to read any digital PDF, and we don't read it from an OCR perspective, which other companies will do. And an OCR will read it like on your left-hand side here. You take a document in and then you OCR a part of that document. So you'll take an XY coordinate of here to get the inspection date. You'll take the XY coordinates of this field on this document to get that bit of information. And then you'll get the XY coordinates to get your next inspection. Now, the problem with that is if somebody puts their logo here and that logo is a little bit bigger, it pushes all of these fields and squashes them all the way down. So when you've defined your XY coordinates, OCR is looking at a place that isn't going to have the data. And if it's squashed it down so that this information is now this information, OCR will pull the wrong piece of data from you. It also takes forever to get it. So what TCW has done is it's took all the 4 different elements of a PDF, and we've created the only technology globally that can structure any digital PDF in a way that you can perform engineering logic to. So we extract 100% of the data. Rightly, at the moment, a lot of that data isn't used just because people don't understand what to do with it. I'll explain a good example of that in a minute. But this is not compliance. And a lot of people I've got a document on file and I know when the next inspection is. That isn't compliance. That's just a process or one part of confirming compliance. Being able to get access to all of this information is probably the most important thing that you need to do. Just to give you an example, just a bit of a screenshot from in the software, you've got an LGSR that comes in. You've got an LGSR, it was carried out before the given date. So you had a specific date that you had to carry out that gas safety record. You achieved that, and you've put a big tick in the box. When you then carry out an assessment, you can see that this LGSR has failed because of some key bits of information that's required within the kind of legislation. So you've got a document on file that was given on a particular date, but it's non-compliant, that document, but you'll still report that you're compliant to a date. And that's where the kind of the ambiguity or the confusion comes along. In terms of the ability from TCW's perspective, when you extract 100% of the data, you can then cross-reference across all of your assets, and then you can start trending. The technology term would be semantic profiling. You can take each individual single data set from all your documents and then marry that across all of your assets to then say, well, this particular postcode has 100 properties, and within those 100 properties, 99 of them are Worcester Bosch boilers, performing at this percentage in terms of manufacturer's instructions. However, this one boiler is not a Worcester Bosch boiler, and we've never installed that type of boiler in our housing stock. That's the level of intricate kind of insight that people aren't looking at. And what we've done is we've made it simple and easy through our UI to pinpoint areas of risk. And then what we're trying to do is move away from that managing compliance to kind of qualifying assurance. Just to give you an example of what that data looks like, a couple of weeks ago, I was sat in the house reading some of the news down in Kent, and there was a safety warning about Beco boilers, Beco and 3 other types of boilers. And it was the gas where you've got the grill at the top and the grill at the bottom. And apparently the manufacturers have come out and said, if you shut the grill whilst it's operating, it will create a combustion CO. And when you open it, 18 people have died across the whole country. On the Monday morning, I sent a message across to our dev team, and within 5 minutes, we had a list of 1,150 odd properties across the whole of the UK. And on Monday, every single one of the housing associations where those properties were notified. And within a week, every single resident was notified. Now that's meaningful data. In terms of what we do as a company, it's not just about checking a document. It's also about validating the content, validating the meaningful information, and also qualifying each individual engineer in that respect from a granular level. So if you've got, for instance, just mentioned there, 180 members of staff and 150 of them are on site. If you have the ability to cross-reference all 150 operatives on site to look at the trends between their performance and say, well, 95% of them are performing at this level, and those other 5 are doing something different to the other 95%. I want to know why. So you're not just managing your asset, you're not just managing your compliance obligations, you're actually providing assurance to the people you provide a property to, but you're also managing the incompetence and the competence of engineers. And that's what TCW kind of provides. Don't take my word for it. If you click on TCW's website, you can click across all of our case studies from the clients that use the product. It is worth noting that CDMS in the marketplace within social housing, the Corgi compliance document management system, that is TCW's product. That we are the engine behind that. So Corgi have seen the opportunity and saw how great our product was, and they've been selling it for the last 4 years. We've got 1.2 million social housing properties registered on the system, and interestingly, they're not small organisations. They're ginormous. Actually, you've got the likes of Leeds City Council, Birmingham City Council, Your Housing Group, Home Group, Gen 2, Fife Council, as you can see, and the majority of our kind of housing stock that we manage is well in excess of kind of 20,000-30,000 properties. So. That is brief. I apologise if it was kind of all over the place. It's hard to get what we do in a very short space of time, but I'm happy to take any questions whatsoever.
Thank you, Ryan. Have you got any questions for Ryan, please? I've got a question for you, Ryan. In terms, you mentioned obviously that you used to work directly in social housing, working for Leeds City Council. I'd be quite interested to know kind of, what was it that kind of sparked the idea for the compliance workbook? What kind of frustrations arose from your personal experience working for the council?
I had the idea well before Leeds. I actually had the idea for this product about 12 years ago when I was working for a contractor, and I was personally I was the person who was responsible for countersigning compliance documents. I'm a fully qualified electrical engineer, and it was my responsibility to QA documents that the electricians were doing. And I didn't do anything with it. Everybody kept saying, "Oh, if you have an idea, don't tell anybody, it'll get pinched. You've seen it on the movies, people pinch their ideas." And so I kind of held on to it naively. And then when I moved to Leeds City Council, I went from having 300 documents a month to check to around about 6,000 compliance documents. And the team of 27 were checking 10%. And I searched high and low. I went to government. I asked everywhere, could somebody tell me where this 10%'s come from? And it isn't written down anywhere. And it kind of transpired that the reason why we check 10% is because we are physically unable, with the resource and the time element, able to check 100%. And again, I didn't really do anything with it until I was sat in the office one day, and I remember I got a phone call from the police telling me that a property had set on fire just around the corner from our office, and got the address, spoke to the team straight away and said, I want all the compliance documents for that address because we're obviously going to get asked questions. And when the electrical document came over, there was a fault on the neutral conductor, and it was indicated from the numbers in terms of, without getting too technical, on an electrical document, the back page is filled with numbers, and to a competent person, those numbers indicate the length of cables and justification whether or not it's been installed correctly. And what I realized then is the document was satisfactory, and the electrician hadn't spotted a difference in the reading that was expected to the reading that was actually noted on the document. And to a qualified person, when you looked at that, you instantly realized that there was possibly a loose wire, or there was a problem with that neutral conductor. After the investigation from the fire service, they said that the fire started in a socket in the kitchen, and that was the circuit that the fault was on the actual document. So I went and found some mad scientists, because I'm not a software guy. I've learned a hell of a lot in software over the last few years. Met some mad scientists, told them what I wanted, and they said it was physically impossible. I went to Leeds IT, asked them if we could do it, and they said it's physically impossible it's easy to read data from PDF documents using OCR or using your Control F function on your computer. You can find a bit of information, but being able to take 100% of the data out of any PDF document and then apply calculation logic to it apparently was physically impossible. It's clearly not, because we've done it, but that's kind of where it came from in a little bit longer than a nutshell.
Fair enough. Thank you for that, Ryan. Have we got any other questions for Ryan before we draw the session to a close with the final breakout sessions? No? Liam, you got one?
Yeah. I was just wondering. So you've shown how your product can be used to kind of to manage risk and to in some cases save lives. I was just wondering if it can also be used to kind of improve efficiencies and bring down costs ultimately, and if you have any examples of how it does that as well.
Understanding your asset takes away the need for assumptions. And at the moment, you go to any housing association and they look at the decent home standard, and this decent home standard would say, for instance, you need a certain number of sockets in a particular room, or a boiler can last for 15 years over a particular, you've got to heat 2 rooms or whatever. So you have standards that define what a housing association has to do from a legal and obligatory perspective. And with our technology, you can drill down to the kind of the granular detail to say, well, Dudley Metropolitan Council, for instance, a few weeks ago said to me, I want a report that indicates any properties and the number of sockets on each individual circuit. And from that assessment, which took us a couple of minutes to do, we identified 3 or 4 properties that had less than 4 sockets throughout the whole house. Now, in terms of investing in, I need £1 million to rewire 500 properties or whatever. And which properties are you going to rewire? Well, I'm going to rewire the ones that were last rewired over 25 years ago. Well, that's redundant now, because I'm going to rewire the properties that I factually know need it, rather than based on an assumptive kind of date range. So those properties with 4 sockets, there was an extensive use of extension leads, which are another fire hazard, overloading powers of sockets. So in terms of where you spend your money, you're still going to have to spend your money on your asset. That's what you do for a living. That's social housing in a nutshell. You have to continuously maintain your properties. However, where you spend your money, we've completely removed the need to assume something based on generic information, and now you spend your money exactly where it's needed. That's a good example, but just kind of to drill into that a little bit further as well, which is a crazy example. We looked at some company cars recently from Leeds Yorkshire Finance Company, and when they asked us what we did for a living, we explained to the finance company what our technology was capable of doing. And forget housing and forget the data analytics on compliance documents, they're actually implementing us in their process to check service records that come back, assessment records, finance documents and contracts, because the technology is capable of normalizing any data in any PDF. It's not just compliance documents, health and safety documents, robotics. The Heinz factory at the moment, when you send an invoice in for 20,000 tins of beans, an OCR reads a particular part of that document, and that number gets passed to a robot, and that robot creates 20,000 tins. Unfortunately, every once in a while, a B comes in that's slightly off-piste, and the OCR thinks it's an and symbol or an 8, and all of a sudden, there's 20,000 additional cans of beans that they can't sell. So the technology being able to kind of guarantee the information is exactly what's on the document. It has many benefits.